We call on Rabbi Jack Siegel to lead us in the 23rd Psalm.
I'm going to recite the 23rd chapter of the book of Psalms in the Hebrew, and I'd like to ask everyone to please join me in the English on the little pamphlets that were handed out to everyone. Mizmor David, Adonai Ro'i lo achsav b'nodeshi yavitzeni al mei menuchot yanaleni. Nafshi yishovev yancheni b'maglei tzedek l'man shemo. Gam ki elech b'geitz al movet lo yirada ki ata imadi. Shibtra mishantecha hemi yanachmuni. Tarok lefonai shulchan neged sorodaim. Dishanta b'shem neroshi kosi rivaya. Ach tov v'chesed yedefuni kol yemei chayayin. V'shavti b'vet Adonai liorech yomim. Please join me in the 23rd Psalm, as I said, on these small pamphlets. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest the table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. It's here with the big papers on.
We come together today, family and friends, on this sad occasion, to pay our respects to and to say our goodbyes to Joe Potvin. Joe was born in 1945 in Worcester, Mass. He attended prep school, then went on to Notre Dame College and Law School, where he was on the Law Review. He and his first wife, Eve, met while they were students. They had 2 children from that marriage, Joe Jr. and Marie Louise, who are here with us today. Joe and Eva were divorced, and in 1975, after several years with General Motors in Detroit, Joe came to Houston to work as in-house counsel for Exxon. Bernice, after finishing school, came to Houston the following year, also to work for Exxon, and that is where they met. Bernice told me that she was immediately attracted to Joe because of the unique warmth that he had, especially as he displayed it in his relationship with his children. Joe asked Bernice to go out with him. When she told him she would not go out with someone who was not Jewish, he enrolled in the conversion class. Their relationship rapidly evolved, and they were married in 1978. Together they had 3 daughters, Debbie, Sarah, and Hannah. Joe was an affectionate and deeply devoted father. As Bernice puts it, he hurried to do good things for them, whether it was taking them to buy shoes, looking after them if they were ill, or driving through a blizzard in Colorado to hear a student recital. When Debbie married Shmuel, Joe's warmth extended to his new son-in-law, and eventually to his 2 grandchildren, Michal and Hobbs. Joe was deeply committed to providing the best educational opportunity for his daughters, beginning with his commitment to Jewish day schools and continuing to private high school and private college. Although he and Bernice lived modestly, their Jewish values were very clear. When education was concerned, they never scrimped. This week's Torah portion talks of Bezalel, the chief architect of the sanctuary that the ancient Israelites carried with them during their wandering in the desert. Bezalel was described as a craftsman in wood, metal, and stone. I don't think that Joe worked in metal and stone, but he was a remarkable craftsman in wood. As many of you know, he designed and built for the Museum Minyan the beautiful art that houses our Torah scrolls, as well as the lecterns and the Torah stands. In fact, his Torah stands were used by the congregation for 2 years until the Levitt Friedman Sanctuary obtained its own. When he became ill, Joe was working on and actually had made substantial progress on a full-size reading desk for the Minyan. Circumstances did not allow Joe to complete that work. Perhaps someone will step forward and do it on his behalf. I sure wish I could, but I haven't the ability. Joe was a member of the Society of American Period Furniture Makers and active in the Woodworkers Club. He loved to make small shaker tables, which he would give as thank you gifts or just as ordinary gifts to his friends. Bernice told me in her bittersweet way that if Joe had known I was going to speak today, he would have made one for me. Joe worked for the Habitat for Humanity. He helped Hannah's medical school class and projects for needy children. He had broad sense of commitment to community, devotion to family and to friends. In closing, I would comment on 2 of Joe's many admirable traits: his courage and his sense of humor. He bravely faced 2 major cancers with confidence. Confidence that he had a good life and knowledge that he would do whatever he could to fight them. In December, he returned to Massachusetts to visit his family and then to Maryland to see his grandson, knowing that these would be farewell visits. Joe also had an extraordinarily dry sense of humor. You had to concentrate on what he was saying, his tone of voice, and the expression on his face, which usually didn't show very much, in order to distinguish a passing comment from a very humorous remark. This dry wit fortified his courage in the face of his serious illness. Bernice told me that he liked to begin the day with a joke. In recent months, his joke was that every day he wakes up on the right side of the grass is a good day. He knew that the end was coming. He faced it with the greatest of courage and dignity, admixed with humor. I think he knew that this would be the best way to help his family and those close to him accept the inevitability of his passing. Joe's nephew Billy would now like to speak. That's correct. After which we will hear from Joe's daughter, Marie-Louise, and his son, Shmuel, his son-in-law, Shmuel. After that, we'll recite the specific burial prayers. So if we can ask Billy now to come forward.
Hi, my name is Bill Mcintosh. I'm one of his nephews from out east, and I just want to say, to the family how much love we have for all of you, how much love we have for Uncle Joe, and how much of a part of our life he was, and how we really have a real kinship with your family. And I say kinship because I'm wearing my Mcintosh tie today, and I've wore this at several other funerals, and my own father and Pepe and it, you know, Uncle Joe, he's very special. We also really appreciate Uncle Joe taking the time to drive out, not fly, drive out to Massachusetts to visit all of us on special occasions. He would get in his car and drive from Texas all the way to Massachusetts, and, you know, without hesitation, he would be there. And so he was a constant, you know, figure in our life, and we really appreciate the effort he made to stay connected with us. His life was so unique with the diversity of thought and action. He was a man who understood complexities of the law, but also knew how to fix the kitchen sink, and also know how to make a bookcase. His knowledge was on all matters was very impressive. But what was most impressive was his total devotion to his family, his love for his children, and you could tell, by the way, when he spoke about you guys, just the radiance in his figure and how he spoke about you guys, and then, you know, most recently at the party, he was holding up his iPhone, showing everyone his grandchildren, and and he was engaged and he was happy and he was with his family out east and bragging about you guys here, and it was very touching. And I just want to talk a little bit about his efforts coming out to see us. Like was already mentioned, he was very sick at the end, and my understanding he was, you know, needed to take a lot of stuff for pain, but it didn't stop him. He came out to go see us anyways, and to see us for the last time, and he came out with two things, to say goodbye to us, but also to talk to us about, you know, he had a pancreatic cancer, and he had two other brothers who also died of that, but he wasn't thinking about himself at that moment. He was thinking about us and encouraging us to go get checked and do genetic testing, and you know, his efforts, you know, on the brink of his life was to think of us, you know, and his extended family. He was worried about us, and he came down there and he spoke to us, and he jokingly called it his before funeral party when we started. He did have a dry sense of humor, but he spoke to us about that, and you know, in his Uncle Joe matter-of-fact manner, you know, talking about the statistical chances of people who are diagnosed with it and how long they have to live, and you know, what we need to do to stay safe, and ended it with sort of a hopeful note that, you know, if you get it now, there's a chance we can, you know, early intervention is the only way to help us, and so he came with a very practical message, and then he ended it with a blessing to all of us. And what he said was that you may all see a long life, that you love your children's children, and then at the end we meet the master of the universe and get our just due. And I sure hope that when I go, I can go as well as, you know, with as much dignity as Uncle Joe. But I think if Uncle Joe would hear, he probably would want us to stop crying. He would say something like, we all have to die someday. I'm at peace. Of course we can't oblige this, at least not yet. We must cry. Our world is diminished by his passing, and we're going to miss him. And we always will. So Uncle Joe, we're going to cry for you for a little while, if you don't mind. And right now, the tears must come, and they will dry with sweet memories of your warm summer afternoon beside the cool New England lake that you love so much. It's where he used to visit us by our lake. And we take comfort in the beautiful, smart children is a sort of a constant reminder of you, especially when I look at his son, Uncle Joe, cousin Joe. He looks exactly like him, and it's a nice reminder to be able to look at all of you and see him and the wonderful things that he left behind, and the woodwork, and it goes on. He's not gone, you know. For me, anyways, I see him in all of you. Thank you.
Try and get through this.
Pick up in that mic so you don't talk right into it.
Try. I'm Joe's daughter, Marie Louise, and I tried really hard when my dad passed away a couple days ago. I was flooded with all sorts of memories, and I tried to sort through them and to think about, you know, how to capture him, and I can't really. I can just sort of relay small things about him. So as a lawyer myself, I always try to categorize things, and so all I want to share with you today are 3 things that I loved about my dad, and 3 things that I think my dad loved. It might take a little longer than Billy at this rate. Everyone's always mentioned Dad's sense of humor, and he loved to laugh, of course, and he loved to make others laugh. And he was young when my brother and I were born, really young, and you know, he was raw, you know. As he aged, he softened, and if you were down or you were grumpy or you were tired, he would go to any length to make you laugh or smile, and he would raise his voice, he would make some fun, he'd make a joke, whatever it took, either to get a smile or in many cases to get some sort of protest that in fact his joke was not funny. Yes, Dad, hay is for horses, haha. We've heard this many times. His humor really got him through the ups and downs of life, but of course it was particularly helpful with the downs. And even when my brother and I last visited just a couple weeks ago, I wondered how many patients at MD Anderson spent so much time trying to make their nurses laugh successfully. You know, he always wanted to see that, and it was so important to him. The second thing I loved about my dad was that he was so strong, but he was so soft. When I was little, to me, he was larger than life. You know, he was big, he was strong, he was gruff, you know, he had a deep voice, and if you went to him crying about, say, I hurt my finger or something, he'd look at you and go, let me see that. Well, we're just gonna cut it off. He didn't suffer fools, and he didn't hesitate to let people know when they were wrong, really, really wrong. But underneath, he was really, really soft. And I remember once when my Aunt Jenny said to me, Marie Louise, well actually she said it, Marie Louise, your dad's a marshmallow. He seems hard, but he's soft. And it was true. He was as soft as as anyone could be, and when you're little, you could just go and he would just wrap around you. And I think we all saw that in him, except maybe people on the other side of the courtroom. And of course, the thing that I love most about my dad, and that I feel is his defining trait, was his generosity. He was generous always with gifts, of course, but his real generosity was with his time and with his love for everyone around him. He never hesitated, and he was always close. He was always there for people close to him. And when we were kids, he seemed to have endless energy for what we wanted to do. I have flooded with memories of things that Dad did with us, and it was for us. I don't think he wanted to go to Astro World every week. I don't think he necessarily wanted to, you know, to down river canyons or go camping on the beach. Maybe he did. He wanted to do it because we wanted to do it. It was always all about us. He always made us feel that we were the most important thing in the world. And I saw that, you know, as Joe and I got older and he had three more beautiful children, that he was always there for them. Anytime they needed something, he would hop in his car, he would drive to Colorado, he would drive to Yale, he would drive up to Boston to do things that, you know, a lot of parents wouldn't do, to help you move or to help you solve a problem. And that generosity extended to his larger family and his friends. It seemed like people always looked to him for guidance and problem solving. He would take charge and he would get it solved. He helped his parents, he helped his siblings, he helped his friends, he helped everyone. I think his generosity was endless and limitless. And then there's three things that I can think of that I know Dad really loved. One thing, of course, is that he loved to collect. I think some people are born collectors, and it was always go big or go home for Dad. When he was into cameras, he must have had 20 cameras, and he could tell you everything about them, the Leicas, the Hasselblads, the Nikons. And of course he always knew the camera shop guys and got good deals and had long chats with them and traded this for that. When something got his interest, he was all in. And more recently, his incredible love for woodworking. He's left behind so many beautiful creations that we can all treasure now, and a woodworking shop that I'm sure any woodworker would envy. The second thing that I could think of that he really loved was knowledge. He spent a lifetime learning. He knew something about everything about a lot of things, and a lot about a lot of things. Anyone who knew him even little knew that reading was his passion. He read everything. If something sparked his interest, he'd go to a bookstore, find a few lengthy tomes on a subject, and dive in and become the latest expert. And one of my strongest memories as a kid was driving into New York City to go to Barnes & Noble, just to go to Barnes & Noble, the biggest bookstore I had ever seen growing up in Canada. I'd never seen anything like this. And we would go, Dad and Joe and I, for hours. We'd each find our section, and then when it was time to go, we'd all have a stat, and Dad would tell us like how many books he was actually going to buy for us that day. And more recently, he never ceased to amaze me with his knowledge of every single area of the law. Whatever subject area I raised, he could easily tell me the state of the law in this country, in Canada, and sometimes Europe, Asia. He knew something about everything. He just was so interested in the world, and he spent his lifetime learning and thinking and just learning more. And then most importantly, which I know we all already know, is the most important thing to him was family. He came from a big family. He wanted a big family. He was lucky enough to find Bernice and to share more than 30 years with her. And over a 20-year span, he had 5 children. And I know he was very proud of each of us. Of course, he was proud of our hard work and our accomplishments. But what really struck me is when I would ask him about how the girls are doing, or if he'd talked to Joe lately, often he would just say, you know, he's a good kid, or she's a good kid. What mattered to him most was that his children were good people, that they were kind and generous and happy. And I see him in each and every one of us. I see all his good qualities. Of course, in some of us, I just see him physically. But I see his calm and kind manner, and his love of kids and family, and his sense of humor, and his laugh. And when I was little, people were always telling me I was just like my dad, and that I was definitely going to be a lawyer just like him. And my mom always likes to remind me how I always protested, no, I'm not, that I'm never going to be a lawyer. And when I got to law school, I just prayed I had a little bit of my dad in me so that I could get through. In his last few months, he said a number of times that he had no regrets, that he had a good life, which to him was that he had a good and interesting career, he got to do and see what he wanted, that he had a wonderful wife and marriage, he had 5 children who were good people, 5 beautiful grandchildren. And he was grateful. And he didn't know how he could have asked for more except what we all asked for, which was more time. When he got together with his extended family over the winter holidays, I thought he really summed it up when he said that family is all that we've got, and it's everything that we've got. And we're missing the cornerstone of our family now. But I'm really grateful to have my memories, and to have Bernice and my amazing brother and sisters. And it's because of him that we're all here. And we have each other. And we're really going to miss him. And we love him so much.
Very good.
Hi, I'm Shmuel Nadada. I'm Joe's son-in-law. We're here today to pay Kavod HaAcharon, our last respects, to Donald Joseph Potvin, just Joe the most, beloved father, husband, grandfather, sibling, friend, lawyer, family guidance counselor, mystery novel sharer, furniture craftsman, car whisperer, crisis curer, sage investor, libertarian, photographer, pen maker, endless teller of the same puns based largely around mispronunciation of words with silent letters, history buff, shameless Apple products consumer, Costco lover, radish eater, and owner of the world record for the longest time anyone has kept 3 daughters on one cell phone plan. A few months ago, having had the latest negative medical news about Joe's disease relayed to us over the phone, Debbie burst into tears and said to me, "How could my dad possibly die? Who will tell us what to do when our car breaks down?" And one of the last things Joe said on his deathbed, surrounded by his loving family, was take care of each other. And we're going to need to. Joe had something special about him, something I've never seen in anyone else I've ever met. He made you feel better. His skill with resolving certain problems was perhaps mildly better than other people's. But with Joe around, it almost didn't matter how a problem got resolved. You could trust that it would. And if it did, you were right, and if it didn't, somehow it wasn't as bad as you thought. More than once, Joe turned to me and said that, "Cheer up, kid, it's worse than you think." Which is what Debbie really meant when she asked how we'd ever manage a car without her dad. She meant that Joe took care of all of us in a way that seemed almost incomparably comforting. And that's how I understand his final request to take care of each other. Half a year ago, when our new house was starting to show signs of imminent collapse, my wife wished for her father to appear, and I wished for him too. Not for his skill, but for the sense of security he radiated around him. So he showed up. He drove across the country, walked through the property, took a quick mental inventory, and said, "All right, kids, I'm heading out." I don't know how he already knew where a hardware store was in Norfolk, Virginia, or where a Costco was for that matter. He drove off a few days later with 3 things fixed and as many left to fix later, and somehow our house didn't feel like it was falling apart anymore. I don't remember where he drove off that trip, but as often as not, he drove to deliver some of his handcrafted furniture to other members of the family. That's one of the things he fixed on that visit. He had fixed the dining room table he had just made for us, which had been damaged by the movers, and he fixed the hand-carved rocking horse that he made for our kids. But nowhere, I think, was the sense of security that he exuded more potent than when Joe was driving a car. Debbie used to climb into a car when he was going to drive it just to fall asleep. There was no place safer. And yes, he knew all the roads and where to buy gas, and by some miraculous pre-Google cache of information, he also knew where the closest camera shop was, but that wasn't the miracle of driving with him. The miracle was that you could close your eyes knowing you'd get there, knowing it was all going to be taken care of. Long before I met him, when Debbie and I were dating, I heard a lot about the myth of him, the dad who would drive across the country because she had a bad week at school, showing up, always with whatever her favorite Costco treat was, just to tell her that he loved her and that she was doing fine and didn't need to worry. The myth of the man who drove and picked her up from gymnastics sleepaway camp because she called him and said she didn't like it. And that was all he needed to hear. The myth of him persisted even as I grew closer to him. We'd be visiting Houston for the weekend, and sometime on Saturday he would drive off and disappear in the middle of the day and come back with lunch or dinner knowing everybody's favorite food from each style of cuisine, and possibly stopping at a second or a third store because Debbie won't eat from here or Hannah likes this better from there. And yeah, sometimes you'd also find a camera receipt in his car or a receipt from the food he'd eaten for himself, which would never make it to the table. But some of the joy of being around Joe was more than just that he took care of you. It was that he exemplified how to take care of yourself. And he took care of himself. And the secret always seemed to be, though never spoken or certainly not speechified, to do it simply. If you're hungry, get food. If you want something, work hard for it. And never ever be petty. And intelligent as he was, as well-versed as he was in so many diverse subjects, Joe seemed to approach every human relationship from an almost irrefutable position of simplicity. The first time I met him at Debbie's college graduation, he asked me point blank if I was going to marry her. He said everything hinged on that. You can't make a question much simpler. The next time was when I visited Debbie in Texas, and for a lark and also in self-defense, I asked him to teach me how to shoot. Later, reviewing my marks, he said simply, "Shmuel, you are not going to be a marksman." He made similar comments far more recently. After that exchange with Debbie about fixing cars and Joe being sick, acting perhaps too literally, I asked him if he could teach me about cars, and he said, "Shmuel, the thing is, you don't really listen to cars. Just change the fluids at 60,000 miles, and put new tires in the Prism, and you'll be all right." Any attempt at creating a metaphor with Joe failed. He wasn't eager to wax philosophic. Every time we had Shabbat dinner together and I asked the question of everyone at the table, "What was your highlight of the week?" Joe alone got away with the answer, "Any day that I wake up on this side of the dirt is a good day." Joe would never have approved of this speech, but it wouldn't have bothered him either. He was happy. He was happy like few people I've ever met. In that light, it almost baffles the mind to consider that during the time I really knew him, the last 6 years, he always had a terminal disease. I would forget from time to time because he had no self-pity. It wasn't like he actively rejected self-pity, it just didn't factor in. He had his trips to the Woodworking Society, his sudden appearances at dinner time with saag paneer or pizza, as he learned my favorite foods and delivered them as faithfully as he did for his own children. He had a simple pleasure in faithfully calling his daily regimen of medicine rat poison, and his absolute and cheerful refusal to either search the week for a highlight or wallow in the lows. moment to moment, year by year, facing first the initial diagnosis, and then the recurrence, and then the second and ultimately fatal cancer. Joe may have been dying, but all I learned from him was the right way to celebrate your life. And he loved his family so, so much. The only meaningful thing I ever gave him was the time with his grandchildren, and I'm so glad I could. He loved them so completely, I can't even begin to describe it. It wasn't dotage, it was total acceptance of them for who they were from the very first day. They were blameless but not flawless. And it wasn't just because they were infants. I saw him love his children the same way. Just because, like his grandkids, they were his. One day Joe got our son Hobbs the silly little Elmo doll, and Hobbs fell in love in an instant, and like clockwork our daughter Michal burst into tears. But doing our duty, Debbie and I talked to Michal about how fair doesn't mean everyone gets the same thing, etc., etc., and halfway through the speech Joe stood up and said, "All right, kid, let's go." We took Michal to Toys R Us to get her one of her own. Did they get one? No. The store closed shortly after their arrival, but she came back happy. And the next day he took her to buy something else instead, which ultimately she gave to Hobbs because she didn't need the doll. She needed the love and attention of her grandfather, and that was never in short supply. My children would have gotten in the car with him and driven anywhere on the planet, no questions asked. And so would my wife for that matter. Just being near him made people so happy. Debbie said to me on Monday that nobody will ever love her again like that the way he could. He was so full of acceptance that he inspired so much love in others. Even my dog adored him beyond measure. She was drawn to him like a small planet circling a large one, endlessly wagging her tail while he insulted her intelligence and scratched her nose and delivered sympathetic cooings about how she must be starved for affection. I was apart from Joe at the end of his life. I was watching the kids, trying to keep them in a normal routine and also trying to prepare them for what had become, by last week, inevitable. In one tender moment, I asked my 5-year-old what good memories she had of her Pepe, because I said it helped to talk about the good things, to cement them in your mind, and to share them with others who were sad, who had suffered the same loss. She said she had only one good memory of him. It was him taking her to Target. I don't know why that one came out first, but before I could say anything, a second drip escaped. Him unwrapping the new chair he had brought home, which surprised us all because we thought he'd be in that other chair for the rest of his life. Then, like a faucet turning from a drip to a trickle to a stream, the memories started pouring out of this 5-year-old girl. Faster than she could say them, all of the things I'd forgotten, the small gifts he'd given her, the places he'd driven her, sitting in his lap. And we got the news later that day, and the next morning we shipped off for Houston. But first I had to pack us up, so I looked for the kids' shoes, and every single pair he'd bought them. And I looked for a book to read on the plane. My entire shelf was secondhand mystery books he'd given me. I couldn't turn around without seeing the impact he'd made on our lives from such a distance and the gap left by his absence. Finally, I got into the car, a car which, incidentally, he took me to the dealership to buy, since it was my first time purchasing a car and he wanted me to feel safe. And sure enough, of all moments, the car started making a strange and alarming clicking noise. And I had no one at all to call. There's a Jewish tradition to say I'm sorry and apologize at the end of a eulogy for anything that may be left behind. And I love you, Joan. I'm sorry I wasn't there to say goodbye properly. I know you're not the type to blame anyone. I'll do my best to help take care of everyone without you, but none of us could ever do what you did. And I hope all of us together can follow your advice and try.
Would you all please rise? There's a prayer that is traditionally sung at a burial service. I'll read it first in English and then chant it in Hebrew. O God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of thy presence, among the holy and pure who shine as the brightness of the firmament. Unto the soul of Joe Potvin, who is gone unto eternity. May God bring him to repose under the shelter of his wings. May his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. May God be his possession, and may his repose be peace.
Amen.
Amen. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamiromim, Hamitzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, B'malot Kedoshim Otiorim, Kezohar Rakia Mazirim, Et Nishmat Yosef ben Abraham v'Sarah shalach leolamo began Eden dehei menuchato lachein balarachamim yastirehu b'seitek kinapav leolamim v'yitzro b'srachim et nishmato Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach B'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar Amen.
The dust returns to the earth from which it came, but the spirit goes back to God who gave it. What we put away are only the earthly material remains of the one we loved and the one we cherished. What has been most precious to us will never die. It will continue to bless and inspire us along the paths of life that we tread. The good name is a crown that will never fade away. The good life is a priceless memory to all their dear ones and to all of us. Therefore, God, we pray, receive in mercy and loving kindness the soul of our dear departed Joe Potvin. Grant him that everlasting peace and bliss which are our portion in the world to come. May we all be given the strength and the courage and the faith to be worthy of life and of the memory of those we love, and to this may we all say, Amen. Amen. In the condition.
We now ask the immediate family to recite the Kaddish. That's the prayer for mourning, which does not mention death. It only affirms life and peace. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah v'yalmad yivrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechonu v'yomechonu v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael v'agalav v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mivarach le'olam ule'olmei almaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei v'yitadav v'yitalei v'yitalal shemei d'kudsha b'richu La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechamata damiran v'yalma v'imru Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom v'mamav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Shiva Minyan will be held at Bernice's home, 5019 Braes Heather, at 6:30 tonight and tomorrow night. As a final sign of respect, those who feel inclined to do so are now asked to come forward and put some earth onto the casket. The tradition is, in fact, to put 3 shovels full of earth, and beginning with the family, and then any friends who wish to do so, please come forward.